Hey, just as a heads up, this is a part 2 to my Bendy in the Dark Revival retrospective/review. If you haven't already, check out part 1, clicking the iCard up below, or using the link in either the description or pinned comment, and then come back here. So now it's time to get to the gameplay. The core base of the gameplay for this title is similar to that of the previous game. It is a first-person horror game with a heavy focus on puzzles, exploration, and combat. Although this game has a much heavier emphasis on stealth as well. It was present in the prior game, but rarely ever required beyond hopping in a shed whenever the ink demon spotted you, and then immediately hopping out as soon as he despawned. For this chapter, I will break the gameplay up into 3 segments. First will be miscellaneous bits of gameplay, where I will look at the level design, mechanics, and abilities. Second, I will examine the combat to see if it is improved upon from the first game, and how it holds up overall. And finally, the stealth mechanics. The core gameplay elements that the player will be expected to interact with in this game will be the exploration segments. These often involve locating and finding specific objects that progress the story in some way. One example of this is the part in Chapter 3, where you must locate 5 pictures to make a lost one open up this door. However, while you are looking for them, the ink demon will occasionally spawn, prompting you to have to hide before he does. The gameplay here sees you crouching through vents and interacting with paintings to pick them up. Upon finding all 5, you then return them to their easels and are allowed to progress. Most puzzle sections in the game function similarly, with there being something you need to find, collect, and then use to open the next door. Some of these take the form of code locks, which have 3 slots that can range from 1 to 5 each. The combination is usually written down bluntly somewhere, which did disappoint slightly, as I had hoped for more complex puzzles, maybe counting the candles placed in different areas or something, but in the end the puzzles are quick enough that they do not detract from the experience, even if they are on the simpler side. The only coded door puzzle that I could foresee an issue with comes from the one in the locker rooms, where the code is written down inside one of the lockers. 215, someone remember that. The issue here is in the fact that the locker in question is closed, and every locker in the setting can be interacted with, which could potentially lead to someone having to open up every locker until they get lucky and find the code. I ended up getting luckier than that though, as I found the code by accident before even encountering the lock, thus making my time much easier than anyone who may not have found that specific locker first, like I did. Another type of door lock you can encounter is a panel which you can open using a fully charged gent pipe. To charge your gent pipe, you must find one of these workstations and input a battery to progress. They are usually simply placed right before the door in question, but some puzzles do hide the workstations further out. However, I never had any issues with these, as I always had way more batteries than I needed, so I never ran out. And I would always recharge my pipe after opening a door so that I did not need to locate one before opening the next door. As the charge does not wear down on its own, only wearing out when you use it for combat, which I didn't even know you could do for half the game. And when I did find out, well, I didn't do. The abundance in batteries was clearly done to incentivize you to charge your pipe more often for use in combat, but again, this is an ability I forgot about most of the time and just left me with an overabundance of the resource. On top of these 2 ways of progressing, there are also 2 new abilities, Banishing and Flow. Banishing is an ability I will explain in more depth in the stealth section, so for now I will discuss Flow. Flow is the essential teleport ability that functions like an air dash. Wherever your cursor is pointing, your character will be flung in that direction in a quick burst when pressed. There's a long cooldown period to use this ability, but it can be shortened with the unstable ink upgrades. You can also increase your max health and max stamina with these. The flow ability is used on several occasions for platforming parts of the game that vary from working well to not doing that. Some parts can feel pretty clunky, and having to wait a while after each use can make it feel even worse. There were several times I would think I could make a jump, only to land into an invisible wall, and even some instances where I couldn't make it because the ability hadn't charged fully yet, and would shatter the flow that the gameplay had up until then. No pun intended. Aside from all this, though, it is possible to locate scraps and pieces that can be used to upgrade your gent pipe, and food that can heal you. The inclusion of these helped to incentivize exploration a great deal beyond the audio logs and memos that would be found around the place in the first game. Finally, you will have a basic sprinting ability, which is a very welcome change from the slow walking of the first game. This time you can actually sprint through the facility at a much quicker pace, cutting down the time spent wandering the same few halls looking for clues or solutions to puzzles. The only issue I had with the sprinting came from the button choice for it on controllers. I played this game with a controller, and there the sprinting requires you to press down on the left joystick, which started to hurt my thumb after long bouts of sprinting, because, well, I sprint through the entire game. This issue could have been alleviated by a simple control remapping area in the settings, but alas, the barren settings do not offer this as an option. In fact, the settings were entirely barren of most options, with very little in the form of accessibility features as well, which could prove a deal breaker for some people. Combat. If you have seen my previous Bendy video, you know that I am not very fond of the combat in that game. I found it slow, clunky, and overall infuriating. Avoiding enemy hits became repetitive and dull, and felt overall like it was a half-baked inclusion. So how does the combat in this game hold up? Not too much better, I'm afraid. That's not to say it's the same quality as Ink Machine, because it's certainly an improvement in some ways, and worse in others. For the most part, however, it's actually kind of unchanged. You, again, only have a single attack button, which swings your weapon, so no cool combos. I don't need combos like you would have in a Warriors game or something, but something minor would be nice. However, having a consistent weapon and damage output is at least preferable to the nebulous damage output of the various weapons in Ink Machine, so at least knowing every time how many hits it will take to kill certain enemies is a boon. However, the kiting strategy I would employ throughout most of Ink Machine now seems mostly invalid, as upon attacking the enemies, I very rarely was able to successfully avoid their attacks as well. Since your only option is melee, you were always within hitting range of your enemies as well, and as such, avoiding their attacks became a complete gamble. Thankfully, we actually have a health bar this time, and dying to most normal enemies does not force you to restart the battle, but rather respawn nearby, but the same enemies still at the same health as before. This means that unfair deaths became a lot less infuriating, and more so a part of the experience of combat. Whether or not that last part is a good thing or not is for you to decide. Personally, I think it does feel clunky, but it's far preferable to the combat in the first game. It is, of course, also possible to use your abilities in combat. However, due to the large charge-up required for flow, it is sadly not a substitute for proper dodging mechanic, like I had wished for in my previous video. Overall, I mainly bum-rushed enemies whenever I encountered them, rather than trying any form of strategy, because oftentimes those strategies just, wouldn't work anyway. So, while the combat is an improvement, I can't say it's actually enjoyable, just devoid of the anger that it would cause previously. Bosses, however, are a different story, and I will go ahead and take a look at each boss encounter in the game to judge its quality. The Widow King. The first boss you fight in the game, the Ink Spider Demon, or as the wiki calls it, the Widow King. I don't recall if this name was ever in the game. Everyone else seems to be calling it the Ink Spider Demon, but I'm gonna go with the Widow King because it sounds cooler and it's what the official wiki calls them. The main strategy for fighting him is to hit all of the switches on the pillars around the room, then beat up the mini-widows before wailing on the boss. Like most enemies, he will attack you with a melee attack. However, if he killed you, rather than just respawning you in the middle of the action with all the enemy's health staying the same, you have to redo the boss fight from the start. And given his attacks are basically unavoidable, if you want to go in and do damage, the only real reliable way to do this is to heal after each phase of attacking the small widows, which costs 15 slugs. So you better have been collecting these, otherwise you're probably doomed, because avoiding his attacks is basically just down to luck, that he doesn't do the move where he pincers you. Aside from this, the fight is fairly simple, and they don't really add any new elements with the later phases. It would be fun if it weren't for the whole, unavoidable attacks thing. Twisted Alice. This fight is much less of a fight and more of a puzzle sequence, while someone is shooting a Tommy gun at you, that is. You must avoid her attacks and make your way up here behind her, where you sneak up behind her and use the Banish ability on her. And don't worry, if she sees you up here, all you have to do is crouch behind something and she will completely forget you were there. This isn't much of a fight since there are no phases, and your only fighting back doesn't even work in the cutscene, with it being the other Alice that kills her rather than you, but most people are counting this, so I will as well. Ship Ahoy Dudley Wilson. The first boss fight I actually kinda like. It's also the last boss fight. Huh, funny how that works. This fight sees you facing off against Wilson, who has taken the form of his childhood drawing, just a little more, that looking. Avoiding his gears is simple, and his chain attack is used against him to rip open these panels that you use to shut off the pylons. Eventually, he will start coming up to you, and you will have to dodge two new attacks, a simple slam down, which gets his anchor stuck so you can attack him, and a swinging attack you can flow through. This phase is far more generic, but it's still functional, which is good at least. Again though, like the Twisted Alice fight, you do not actually deal the killing blow, with the Ink Demon doing this instead. Ending. So I don't know that this fully counts as a boss fight, but I will still put it here because it's such a unique segment compared to the rest of the game. Here you take control of the Ink Demon, which was really exciting for me playing, and smash your way through hordes of enemies and walls, which is a fun idea and a concept, but does go on for a little too long, to a point where you realize it's really not all that impressive. The smashing feels clumsy, as do his controls, and the overall gameplay of smashing walls is really repetitive. Seeing the characters from the first game showing up for the final fight is fun, but also probably means nothing if you aren't familiar with the first game, which for a game selling itself as not a sequel or a prequel is a slight issue, but oh well. It's spectacle over actual content, which I think is fine since it does come right after an actual boss fight, but if this had been the only real thing at the ending, I might feel a little less positive on the whole affair. Stealth. Yeah, we're still in the gameplay chapter, and now we're going to talk about the last of the 3 categories I have made here, stealth. So in the first game, the only real stealth mechanics were with the projectionist, where you had to duck into sheds every time he saw you. However, if he did see you, jumping into a shed would instantly make him forget, and since you can outrun him easily, this removed all tension from this section. So how does this new stealth hold up? Well, pretty well. For starters, stealth is a much bigger element in this game than the last, and thus is more fleshed out, which is good. Before you get the jet pipe, it's your only option for avoiding the lost ones, and it actually makes for some pretty fun segments. One of my personal favorites is this one at the beginning. To get the pipe, you have to go around this area, avoiding the enemies and accomplishing small tasks. One element that does carry over is that the enemies still forget about you instantly after jumping into hiding spots, but now they can actually outrun you, and in most scenarios, there are more than one. So they also outnumber you, and thus make it a much more real threat, so them instantly forgetting is a blessing more than an issue. The tension is much more heightened. The biggest issue would just be that dying to lost ones doesn't really do much, you just respawn right next to where you were with no repercussions, but I'll take this any day to the system of resetting swaths of progress from the first game. As for the banishing ability I mentioned earlier, this ties into the stealth system, with it requiring you to sneak up behind unaware enemies and pressing a key to instantly kill them, while healing yourself. I didn't use this ability too much, as most enemies you can use it on can easily be felled with your pipe, but it is a nice option to have. Overall, I like the stealth system. There's just one major issue, and it's not unique to stealth, but definitely takes center stage here, and that's the overall inconsistency with selecting objects, specifically hiding spots. You see, you cannot interact with hiding spot unless it glows yellow, like this, but sometimes it just, won't glow. I think the idea with this was to stop people from entering hiding spots from behind, but it feels too restrictive and has led to multiple unfair deaths. This issue has occasionally led to me glossing over important items without realizing I could pick them up, cause they would blend in and not glow when they should. One of the few things I consistently praised about the first Bendy and the Ink Machine was its soundtrack. Even amongst everything else going on, I still think that Ink Machine had a surprisingly decent soundtrack with fitting themes. So, does the sequel live up to it in that regard? Yes. Dear Lord, yes. The soundtrack to this game is insane, from the quaint and creeping piano notes and slow strings heard in Audrey's theme, to the booming orchestral masterpiece of the Crawling Swarm, or whatever the tracks are called. The official soundtrack hasn't been released as of writing this, so I'm just going off fan titles. The tracks in this game are just so good! They each accomplish exactly what they need to, and the recurring motifs help tie everything together so neatly. I love how Audrey's theme is repurposed in so many new ways throughout the game, such as in the track Standing Together, where it's given an epic choir, trumpets, and drums to emphasize the epic finale, with all the characters coming together to support her in her journey, emphasized by all the instruments themselves coming together. The music does such an amazing job of bringing everything from the last 2 games together and weaving not only just a story, but an epic. This is a truly cinematic soundtrack, and I found myself humming a multitude of the tracks from the game without even realizing it. I love how in the final boss theme you can hear samples of Sailor's hornpipe to support the pirate theming of what Wilson has become. the drumming urgency behind the raging beast track, and the almost fairy tale-like nature to Audrey's theme, supporting the comparisons to something like Alice in Wonderland even more. Thankfully, the auditory excellence of this game extends beyond just the soundtrack as well. The voice cast is great. I especially loved Audrey's voice. Maybe it's just because I love having a protagonist that doesn't sound like he's whispering directly into the mic for each line, but hell, I have to admit, even hearing Henry's original voice actor come back was kind of nice. Even if it was just so that me and my friends could whoop like apes about to chow down on fecal speckled bananas.
Yeah, that's Henry.
Basketball.
I know that fucking voice anywhere.
Just another day, another dollar.
Better get over to this.
Another day, another dollar.
Yes! Oh my god, yes!
The Ink Demon's voice was also another standout. This raspy and wet yet still booming voice lent a lot of authority to this supposedly terrifying creature, boosted by the sound effect that directly precedes his surprise appearances with that of a thumping, inky heartbeat. Because that's another thing, is the overall sound design. The way doors actually sound like they're echoing throughout the halls when they open distantly, and there were multiple moments when the creepy ambience forced me to stop out of fear that something unsavory might be just around the corner, which is always a good thing to have in a horror game that prides itself on linear and claustrophobic hallways. Overall, the sound design and music in this title thoroughly impressed me from top to bottom, and was a great step up from the previous title. Another subject I praised the previous game for, and like the last chapter, is enhanced tenfold here. This game looks amazing. The addition of more blue lighting to counter the otherwise yellow and orange facade added so much in terms of depth, and really helped to better sell some of these locations. And opening up the game in a far more realistic style really helped to further sell the fact that this inky world is an entirely distinct place from our own. This is not our world, and something is clearly wrong. Missing, even. That is conveyed from the second you wake up in this familiar wooden setting. On top of this, the models are all top quality, with the modelers really bringing their A-game for this one. Small touches can help to add so much character to everyone, like how Bendy's head isn't perfect, with the black inky substance melting over the top of his head slightly, as if to tell us something isn't quite right about him from the get-go. Or the details on Wilson's creepy face, a scar running along his gray eye, as if to convey some untold story of his past, lending further credence to the idea that his father might have been abusive as well as absent. So much ambient storytelling like this can be found throughout the game, making it a feast for the eyes. But with the majority of the game still taking on this yellow with hints of blue color scheme, they are able to use this to create impactful moments, such as Wilson's childhood picture and the pathway leading to him. The only real change I would have made would be to perhaps make the boss go all out with the color, creating colorful explosions of light as you deactivate the pylons. But even as it is, the pylons still radiate this colorful energy that denotes their importance, and something about the subtlety of the multicolored blood seeping from Wilson's final form helps to sell the mismashing of the real world and ink in the unnatural way. And having the ending cutscene return to the office we started the game in, bookending it with a look at Bendy, creates a powerful and impactful image to end the game on. Again, with the incredible art direction that it has, this game is able to weave itself into a portrait that depicts the tale it wants to tell in an all too convincing way. Alright, with all that praise, you might assume it's a perfect game. But no game is ever truly perfect, and sure enough, this game has its fair share of bugs and glitches, including bugged pathing and occasionally bugged spawning. However, if we were to compare this to the first game, then this is all child's play in comparison, because at least this game has a functional save system.
Wait.
And at least this game doesn't have a super easy to trigger glitch that renders the entire game out for a second. The worst I encountered was how easily it was to bug the AI.
Oh no! Not the elevated surface.
and some enemies that spawned and then proceeded to not despawn correctly.
Wait, what?
Also, this happened to another keeper, which I thought was pretty funny.
Voodoo. Is it stuck again? It's stuck again. It's stuck again. Can you even get me? Hello?
Walk by it.
I feel like it'll get me
WILLJEUM.
then.
Now's your chance to check the arm thing.
Okay.
He's gonna like free himself at an unexpected moment and then jump scare you.
Oh, almost certainly.
It did!
Yeah.
God damn, I saw the light and I was like, yep, I'm fucked.
Yeah, it seems the keepers have a tendency to get stuck a lot. I also occasionally got this glitch where female lost ones can get stuck, like, on you. They can't seem to hit me, but I can still hit them. Aside from this, I didn't have too many major issues, besides the occasional lag spike, but these were rare enough that it didn't impede the experience too much. One of my favorite aspects of games like these is their ability to hide cool or creepy secrets around the place. Finding a whole hidden room behind a super secret puzzle that very few players will ever know about is always such a cool thing to do. And I'm not even talking about exclusively lore editions, but also just dumb fun ones. Like, take this one for example. In the city section of chapters 4 and 5, if you look around enough, you'll notice these pots around the place that look suspiciously like the pots from another famous video game. If you go around the place and smash all of them, and look up, you get that. Another cool secret comes from this puzzle, where you can activate a radio and then run over to this part to get into a secret room. They even have a little Bendy flavored D&D setup, which is just awesome. You can also find 2 halves of these concert tickets, and if you take these back to an earlier area in the game, you can find a Lost Ones concert. They even had the VA for Audrey record a unique line of dialogue for this event. Hell, there are even 2 secret endings, one of which occurs if you just don't press the E button at the beginning of the game, and another if you collect all of these books that are scattered around the place. And these are just the secrets that have been discovered as of writing the script. No doubt plenty of new secrets will pop up in the future as well. All of these hidden spices contribute, alongside the collectibles, into making this location feel like somewhere I actually want to explore. Somewhere I actually want to research and spend time in. So if you're planning to play this game yourself, keep an eye out for secrets and puzzles that others may not have noticed, because there's always something lurking around the corner, whether it be a fun secret room or the sodding Tic Tac Man. Also, adding this in post, but they recently added a cool new Christmas update that gives Bendy a little hat. How cool is that? Answer? Very cool. So, to go back and summarize my thoughts in the first game, I hated it. The gameplay felt bland and uninspired, the characters were flat and poorly fleshed out, the level design was repetitive and dull, with horribly paced fetch quests and forced retreading of old ground all over the place. Overall, it was a mess. But this game seems to take so many of those criticisms to heart and improve upon them tenfold in so many ways. Yeah, it still shares some issues, such as the lacking combat or occasional odd puzzle here or there, but overall, it takes the failings of the past and uses them to craft a better sequel. But, what if this could also work in reverse in a way? Now, don't get me wrong, the gameplay elements of the first are still, well, to be blunt, substandard, second-rate, and simply shoddy. But from a story perspective, at least, does this game take the original and put it in a new light? Does it fix the biggest glaring issue of a story-based game having a, well, bad story? No. The first game on its own is still a confused mess. But what it does accomplish is putting the story into perspective for the sequel. The first title still retains its infuriating, well, I hesitate to say charm. But this new entry in the now growing franchise earns itself a good story by fixing, in the best ways that it can, the ending to the first game. You see, that ending now makes sense. Not because of the merits of the rushed and theory-baiting first game, but instead of the merits of this game's efforts. I do think the overall story of the franchise is helped by this game, going back and applying some patches to the story. Although it does not affect my opinions of the first game itself. If this really was all planned, which, let's be honest, it very likely wasn't, then they could have implemented it there. But by showing care to actually mop up your previous mess alongside crafting a new story that can still stand on its own, it shows they can actually give some iota of a crap about making the story something decent. At least they do now. So that actually makes me slightly more hopeful for if they do continue the story from here, which, judging by the ending, they very likely will. It gives me hope that they might actually take the story in an interesting place, and for a game that sells itself on story, that is incredibly important. So, to answer the question, no, it does not fix the first game's story. But yes, it does fix the game's story. If that makes sense, because it certainly doesn't to me. Well, here we are at the very end. I've covered every topic I wanted to on this game. Everything from the story, to the characters, to the obligatory sodding Tic Tac Man reference. See, there it is, right there. The only thing I haven't covered in full would be the controversies of past, which I covered briefly in my last video, but since there have been very little in the likes of updates on that, all I'll say is to check out Chris Portal's videos. They are infinitely better explaining all of the drama than I could ever be, so I'll just leave it at that. If you cannot bring yourself to buy this game and support the studio, that's completely fair. There's some pretty bad stuff that happened and still hasn't been fully or properly addressed. But I can't lie and say that the thing they put out isn't good, because in this case, I think that it is. And it is my job to offer my honest opinions on this title in this video. Or I just wanted to play a fun video game. This game is good, or at least I genuinely believe it to be. It has its issues, sure, but what game doesn't? And when put in comparison to the previous title, you can rest assured that I am no shill. The last game is a hot pile of steaming trash, and it looks no more delectable now than it did upon its initial release. But this game does something so important in the world of entertainment, and that's listening to criticism. Using it to improve your art and make something that those critics can look at and say, yeah, it alright. Because you know what? It alright. It gosh diddly darn alright. Again, I can't call this some kind of masterpiece. It certainly still has its kinks. And from the occasional bugs and pathfinding issues to the combat, which remains a pretty large part of this game and is still, well, painful to interact with, for both me and the enemies. But for every flaw it retains, it seems to improve in so many other ways. I'm so happy to say I had a great time playing it, and you can look to my stream for proof of that. I remain pretty happy throughout most of my experience playing the game, because it did genuinely keep me entertained. A fun game. And in the end, isn't that what we all really come to the industry for? A fun time? Well, I guess some of us forgot to tell EA that, but that's besides the point. As I wrap up this video, I want to, again, take a moment to thank all of you for watching, and remind you to consider subscribing and liking. As stated earlier, it helps out more than you can imagine, and given that my last Bendy video already underperformed, it would be nice to know I can expand into more types of content and still expect some viewership. Although, going forward, I probably won't split these videos into 2 parts anymore. That clearly didn't really work out in my favor. In the end, though, I made this video because I wanted to share my experience about this game, because it helped me to compile my thoughts together into one concise medium, and so that I can share those thoughts with all of you. So consider sticking around, because I've got plans to do more videos like this and all sorts of things in the future. Who knows what I'll do next? Why, I could even kill a man. Do you doubt me? You shouldn't doubt me. I have experience. I'll do it again. But, yeah, thanks for watching and making it this far. Let me know down below what you thought of the game. Maybe you agree. Maybe you disagree. Let me know your experiences, as well as what games you'd like to see me cover next in this style of video. Some things I'm considering now are SCP Containment Breach, Undertale / Deltarune, and FNAF Ruin. But, anyhow, I'm gonna take my leave now, so, ciao.